All right, TalkTicker listeners, get ready. Today we're going deep on Lockheed Martin's Q3 2024 earnings call. We got all the stuff, press releases, financials, the transcript, ready to dig in.
What's kind of interesting about Lockheed Martin right now is that they've got this record backlog, but also some really unique challenges when it comes to actually delivering on all that, like high demand meets production roadblocks. It's kind of fascinating.
So it's not just about the numbers themselves, right? It's about the story behind them.
Yeah, exactly. So today we'll unpack what's driving that growth, what's standing in their way, and what it all might mean for their future. It's like a deep dive into the financials of a defense giant.
So let's start with that record backlog, over $165 billion in future business. And their book-to-bill ratio was a solid 1.3.
Now, for anyone who, isn't a financial expert, that book-to-bill ratio, that being above 1, means they're adding to that backlog faster than they can actually work through it. Think of it like a restaurant with reservations booked out for months.
Oh, okay, so a good problem to have then, right?
Usually, yes, but it also puts pressure on them to deliver. And even with that massive backlog, sales are only up 1% year over year. Though it's important to remember, not all of Lockheed's segments are, doing the same. Their missiles and fire control division is doing really well, high single-digit growth.
The things that go boom division.
Right, exactly. The Javelin, GMLRS, JSM, LRA, SM, these are those precision and air defense systems that are in high demand around the world right now.
Which makes sense given, current global events. Now, this brings up a good point some analysts were asking during the call. They were pushing Lockheed on what, besides that huge next-generation interceptor program, could get them to, stronger mid-single-digit growth.
Right. And then there's always the classified programs. Those are always kind of lurking in the background. And we just have to, read between the lines and guess a bit. Makes it all the more interesting, though.
Speaking of interesting, let's talk about the F-35. They got 48 jets out the door this quarter, keeping them on track for 90 to 110 for the year.
But the numbers don't tell the whole story, Behind the scenes, it's a bit more complicated. Those ongoing negotiations for the Lots 18 and 19 production contract and the TR3 software are adding, some more complexity.
Okay. All right. Let's unpack those one at a time. First, the TR3 software. I heard they do this release model, like a phased approach. What's that all about?
Think of it like, software updates for your phone. That's what Lockheed is doing with the F-35's TR3 software. Release 1, what's on the jets right now that lets pilots train and, basic operations.
So it can fly, but it's not fully combat ready.
That's right. It's like beta testing on a, multi-billion-dollar scale. Release 2, that's when it gets full capabilities.
Yeah.
But that depends on testing and certifying each system individually. It's a really complex machine, Got to make sure it all works perfectly, especially when lives are at stake.
Right. Rushing software for a fighter jet, not a good idea.
Yep.
But how does all this affect Lockheed financially?
Well, it's a logistical, a logistical puzzle. It affects the delivery schedule. There'll be a mix of new jets and jets that were already built but parked, waiting to be delivered. It all depends on what each customer needs and how fast that TR3 certification goes.
So the planes are ready, but the software rollout is adding another layer of complexity.
Got it. What about those Lot 18 and 19 contract negotiations? How's that impacting things?
Well, it's putting Lockheed in a tough spot. You
Yeah.
see, the government can't actually legally pay them for the work that's already being done until that contract is finalized.
Oh, wow. That's got to be a big cash flow problem, right?
Yeah.
Especially for a program as big as the F-35.
It does put a strain on them in the short term, yeah. But it's really important to understand it doesn't change the overall value of the program. It's more a timing issue, like having a big invoice that's just stuck being processed.
A really big invoice. Yeah, like a multi-billion-dollar one. And here's what's really interesting. Despite that financial hit, Lockheed is still focused on keeping the production line moving. Why? To protect those smaller suppliers down the chain.
That's a big move, to take on that financial burden themselves.
It is. It shows they're committed to the program and they get how important the whole industry ecosystem is. They're saying, we're in it for the long haul and we're bringing everyone with us.
So you've got the software issues and the contract delays. Sounds like a project manager's nightmare. How are they managing all of this?
Well, they're focusing on collaboration. They're working closely with all their partners and talking to government officials, even at the CEO level, to find solutions and get everything back on track.
All hands on deck to keep the F-35 program flying high.
Exactly. And it seems to be working, at least when you look at the global demand. 6 new countries have signed up for the F-35 since 2020, and some existing partners are ordering even more. The F-35 is still a hot item.
So even with the hurdles, the demand is still there. But the F-35 isn't the only thing Lockheed makes, right? They've got a whole bunch of other products and services.
Right. Let's shift gears a bit and look at some of their other business highlights.
Okay, good idea. What's happening outside of the stealth fighter world? Anything else interesting in these reports?
Well, their aeronautics division, their C-130J Super Hercules fleet, just hit a big milestone, 3 million flight hours. That's like flying around the world over 12,000 times.
Wow, that's a lot of flying. Any big deliveries there?
They delivered the first C-130J30s to Ohio and the first J variant to New Zealand. And Egypt is set to be the 23rd operator of the J variant. It's a global workhorse, that C-130, supporting all sorts of missions all over the world.
It's like the Swiss Army knife of aircraft, huh? Solid performance from the C-130. What about those missiles and fire control systems? Anything big happening over at MFC?
Remember those munitions we were talking about earlier, the ones that are, flying off the shelves? MFC is getting a lot of contracts. They got the biggest ever single-year Javelin production contract, $1.3 billion from the U.S. Army. And they also got a $4 billion contract for GMLRS.
Wow, those are some impressive numbers. Seems like everyone wants a piece of Lockheed's high-tech weaponry.
Yeah, and it's not just the Army. The Air Force gave them a multi-year contract for JSSM and LROSM worth over $3 billion. Those long-range missiles are becoming more and more important, and Lockheed is in a good position to, benefit from that.
Okay, so MFC is doing really well. What about rotary and mission systems? Any wins there?
They delivered the last VH-92A presidential helicopter, which marks the end of that program. Fun fact, Lockheed has been flying U.S. presidents since 1957. That's a long time.
It must be a big responsibility to build the aircraft that carries the commander-in-chief.
Speaking of going high up, what's happening in Lockheed's space division? Well, in space, they got a $300 million contract from NASA to build the next-generation Lightning Mapper instruments for the GeoXO weather satellite program. They're keeping an eye on the skies from all angles.
Talk about diversifying your portfolio. Any other big contracts they got?
They did. They got a contract to continue work on the Fleet Ballistic Missile Program. That's a crucial part of, national defense, and it shows their expertise in that area.
So it's clear Lockheed is doing well across all its divisions.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the financial health of the company as a whole. How are their margins looking? Are they as healthy as their backlog?
Let's take a closer look at those numbers. So their margins are they're looking pretty good, actually, trending upwards. Their segment operating margin, that's a key measure of profitability, That expanded 20 basis points year over year to 10.9%.
Okay, wait, basis points. Can you break that down for our listeners who aren't financial experts? What does that actually mean in terms of, money for Lockheed?
Sure, yeah. Basis points, it's just a way of measuring changes in percentages. 1 basis point is 0.01%. So a 20 basis point increase, that means their operating margin went up 0.2%. Might sound small, but on billions of dollars in revenue, it's a decent improvement in profit.
Okay, so their margins are growing. Means they're getting better at making money. Always good. What else stood out in the financials? Well,
they're generating a good amount of free cash flow, $2.1 billion just this last quarter, bringing the total so far this year to a hefty $4.8 billion.
Wow, that's a lot of cash. What are they doing with all that?
They're putting a good chunk of it, $1.7 billion, back into the business through, share buybacks and dividends. Keeps investors happy and shows confidence in their future growth.
So they're keeping investors happy and reinvesting in the business. Sounds like a good balance. But it's not all perfect, right?
Right.
We talked about some of the challenges like that F-35 settlement.
Yeah.
How's that affecting their cash flow?
Right, that F-35 lot 1517
Yeah.
settlement, that's going to have a $600 million unfavorable impact on their 2024 free cash flow.
Ouch, that's a big hit. But you said earlier it's more of a timing thing.
Yeah, exactly. They expect to recover that cash in the following years. It's a bump in the road, not a complete derailment.
So a temporary setback. Any other financial troubles on the horizon?
Well, they mentioned some potential pension headwinds they might have to deal with down the line.
Pension headwinds. Can you translate that for our listeners? What does that mean for Lockheed?
Basically, it means their pension obligations, they could become more expensive, put some strain on their cash flow in the future. It's like a balloon that's slowly inflating. You got to manage it carefully or it could, burst.
Okay, so something to keep an eye on. Analysts were definitely asking about that on the call, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They were throwing all sorts of questions at them about how they plan to handle these potential pension issues.
What would the company say about their approach to all this?
They said they're looking at a mix of things, some internal measures like reducing working capital and some external options like issuing debt. They're basically exploring all their financial options to figure out the best way to manage those pension obligations.
So they're not just sitting around, they're actively looking for solutions. Good to know. Now, what about those losses on that classified program at Missiles and Fire Control? That sounded a bit worrying.
Yeah, those losses are definitely something to watch. They're expecting $325 million in losses for fiscal year 2024 on that program.
That's a pretty big hit, especially for a division that's otherwise doing so well. What are they doing to try and reduce those losses?
Well, Lockheed's leadership, they said they're actively involved in managing the program and trying to, minimize those losses. They're bringing in their A-team to try and turn things around.
Sounds like a situation that needs careful attention.
Yeah.
Analysts were digging into this too, weren't they? Trying to figure out if the program was getting better or worse.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it seems like a lot of the volatility they're seeing is due to accounting stuff. It's a complex program, lots of moving parts. So predicting the financials accurately can be tough. They're working on getting a clearer picture of what's going on.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a sign of a failing program, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Now, zooming out a bit, let's think about the bigger picture. What are the overall trends that are impacting Lockheed's business?
Well, on the one hand, they're benefiting from this surge in demand. Governments all over the world are increasing their defense spending. Geopolitical instability, new threats popping up. It's a good time to be in the defense business.
So it's boom time for the defense industry. But I imagine that creates its own set of challenges, right? It's not as simple as just making more weapons.
Exactly. There's huge pressure to increase production and deliver these, highly complex systems quickly and reliably. It's not like flipping a switch. It takes a lot of planning, complex supply chains, and a skilled workforce.
So it's not just about building more, it's about building smarter and faster. How is Lockheed handling that challenge?
Well, that's where their 21st century security strategy comes in. They're putting a lot of money into things like AI, autonomy, and digital engineering. The goal is to transform their production systems, making them more agile and resilient. Think automation, data analytics, predictive modeling. They're bringing the tools of the digital age to the defense industry.
So they're not just trying to keep up, they're trying to stay ahead of the curve. It's like they're running a marathon while also building the road ahead of them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's not just technology. They're also focused on their workforce, attracting top talent and creating a culture of innovation. They know that people are at the heart of their success.
So they're embracing technology, building a strong team, and adapting to a rapidly changing world. What are the key parts of their 21st century security strategy? How are they putting this vision into practice?
They're focused on three main areas. First, making their production system more resilient and scalable. We've already seen this with their commitment to keeping the F-35 production line going, even with those contract delays. They're willing to take short-term hits to ensure long-term stability and growth.
So they're thinking long-term. They know sometimes you gotta weather the storm to come out stronger on the other side. What's the second part of their strategy?
They're speeding up the integration of cutting-edge tech, not just in their products, but also in their internal operations. So AI-powered design tools, advanced robotics on the factory floor, data analytics for optimizing the supply chain. They're looking to gain an edge through technological innovation, baking innovation into their DNA.
Like they're transforming themselves into a high-tech powerhouse from the inside out.
Yeah.
What about the third part of their strategy?
Expanding their international partnerships. This does two things. It expands their production capacity and boosts international sales. They're working with companies and governments around the world, tapping into this global network of expertise and resources. Think joint ventures in India, technology sharing with European partners, collaborating on next-gen defense systems with allies in the Asia-Pacific.
So they're not just an American company. They're becoming a global player in the defense industry. And it sounds like all these efforts are geared towards one big goal, increasing free cash flow per share and delivering value to their shareholders.
Exactly. They're trying to balance those short-term challenges with long-term growth, making sure they stay a profitable and sustainable business for years to come. It's a complex and challenging landscape they're navigating, but they're doing it with a clear vision and a strategic roadmap.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture. Now let's zoom back in on the earnings call itself. What specific things from the transcript jumped out at you? What were some of the key takeaways from the CEO's comments and the Q&A with the analysts?
You know what really stood out to me? The level of detail Jim Teichlet, the CEO, gave about the F-35 program. He didn't shy away from the complexities. He really got into the why behind the phased rollout of that TR-3 software, tackling those challenges head on. You don't often hear CEOs getting into those sorts of technical details during an earnings call.
That is interesting. You'd think they'd want to, downplay the challenges and focus on the good stuff during an earnings call.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But I think it shows their commitment to transparency, and their confidence in their ability to overcome these hurdles. They're not trying to sugarcoat anything. They're being upfront, acknowledging the complexities while also showing their determination to find solutions.
So a mix of honesty and optimism, a realistic view of the situation,
Yeah.
but also a belief in their ability to get through it all. What else stood out to you from Teichlet's comments?
He really emphasized the unprecedented level of collaboration between Lockheed Martin, their partners in the industry, and the government. They're all working together to make sure that F-35 program succeeds. And we've talked about, it's facing some pretty big challenges. It's like they've formed a united front, competitors coming together to achieve a common goal.
It sounds like they're recognizing that, in today's world, even the biggest companies can't do it alone. They need to work together, share knowledge, and collaborate to solve problems and reach their goals. It's an interesting look at how business is changing in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And it's not just about collaboration between companies and governments. They're also focused on fostering collaboration within Lockheed Martin itself, breaking down those walls between departments and promoting teamwork across different functions. They get that innovation often happens when you bring different disciplines together. So they're creating an environment where ideas can flow freely and people can work together smoothly.
So they're building a culture of collaboration both inside and outside the company. It's kind of like that concept of anti-fragility they talked about during the call, isn't it? The idea that a system can actually get stronger when it's exposed to stress or shocks.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're applying that principle not just to their products and supply chains, but also to their organizational structure and their approach to problem solving.
Can you say more about that? How is Lockheed Martin using this idea of anti-fragility in their operations?
Well, one example is their efforts to diversify their supply chain for key components, like those solid rocket motors we talked about. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket,
Oh.
They're spreading the risk, getting components from different suppliers in different parts of the world. That way, if one supplier has a problem, whether it's a natural disaster, political upheaval, or a cyber attack, they have backups. They're building redundancy into their system, making it more resilient to shocks and disruptions.
So they're not just trying to avoid risk; they're trying to build a system that can handle those risks and come out stronger. It's like training your body to handle stress. The more you expose it to controlled stress, the stronger and more resilient it becomes.
That's a great analogy. And it goes beyond just supply chain management. They're also investing in advanced manufacturing techniques and digital engineering tools to create a more agile and responsive production system. They're moving away from those rigid linear processes and towards a more modular and flexible approach. They're building a system that can adapt to change, incorporate feedback, and iterate quickly. It's a more dynamic and resilient approach to manufacturing, one that's better suited to the uncertainties of the 21st century.
So they're trying to future-proof themselves, anticipating disruptions, and building a system that can not only survive them, but actually benefit from them. That's a fascinating and forward-thinking approach. Now, after digging into all this, their financials, their strategy, their comments during the call, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into Lockheed Martin?
I want them to really understand the complexity of what Lockheed Martin's dealing with. They've got pressure from every direction. Demand, production, geopolitics, technology, finance. It's like they're juggling a dozen flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope.
That's a great analogy. But what's impressive is that they're doing it while staying focused on their long-term goals. and delivering value to their shareholders. They're not letting the challenges distract them from their mission, and they're finding ways to turn those challenges into opportunities.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Lockheed Martin so interesting to follow. It's a story of challenges and opportunities, risks and rewards. They're operating in a high stakes environment, but they're doing it with a combination of technical skill, strategic thinking, and a willingness to adapt and evolve. They're a company at the forefront of innovation, playing a key role in global security. Their decisions have they have a big impact, and their story is one that will continue to unfold in the years to come.
Welcome back, Talk Ticker listeners. We've been going through Lockheed Martin's Q3 2024 earnings call, and there's been a lot to cover.
From record backlogs and those F-35 bumps in the road to that anti-fragility concept, it's clear Lockheed Martin is they're not your average company. They're a complex operation in a fast-changing world.
As we wrap up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to understand about Lockheed Martin?
I want them to see past the fighter jets and the missiles. Lockheed Martin, they're really important to global security. Their decisions, they don't just affect their own profits. They affect, they have a ripple effect across geopolitics.
So it's not just about the money. It's about the future of defense itself.
Yeah, exactly. And like we've seen, that future has a lot of, both roadblocks and opportunities. They're dealing with production bottlenecks, the complexity of new software like that TR3 system for the F-35, and of course, the constant, the back and forth contract negotiations. But at the same time, they're really pushing the boundaries in areas like AI and autonomy.
It's like a giant balancing act, needing both, a long-term vision and the ability to actually get things done.
And here's what makes it so interesting. They're not just reacting to change. They're trying to anticipate it, even influence it. That idea of anti-fragility, remember? That's not just, a fancy word. It's built into their strategy.
So it's not just about getting through disruptions. It's about actually doing better because of them.
Right. They're diversifying their supply chains, going with more agile manufacturing, and building in redundancy. It's like, it's like getting ready for a hurricane by not only making your house stronger, but also learning how to surf.
This deep dive has definitely given our listeners a lot to think about. But before we go, what's that one thought-provoking question you want to leave them with?
We've been talking about the external pressures Lockheed Martin faces, right? But what about the people? Can their culture and leadership really keep up with this crazy pace of change? Will they be able to, to be flexible enough and take enough risks to not just survive, but actually lead in this new era of defense?
Those are great questions. It reminds us that even a giant like Lockheed Martin, at its core, it's still all about the people. Their success depends on getting the right people and keeping them.
Yeah, and that's what I'll be watching as Lockheed Martin's story keeps going. Will they be able to build the kind of team and culture that makes them truly anti-fragile? We'll have to wait and see.
Talk Tickers listeners, we've covered a lot today,
yeah.
From the detailed financials to the big picture strategy. Hopefully you have a much better understanding of what's shaping Lockheed Martin's future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Lockheed Martin's Q3 2024 earnings call. Until next time, happy investing.